What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Saturday Morning College Football Show here on RotoGrinders. I am Justin Van Zuiden here alongside John Laub as usual. Fun Saturday college football slate on tap. And I was just going through, 10, 15, 20 minutes before the show. I was going through the list today, and I'm like, it is very unusual for college football on the main slate today. We have no injuries except for, Harris for Ole Miss, who's been banged up for a couple weeks. He's probably the big one. He's questionable today, but there's no other injuries, and that's amazing. It's very rare, especially at this time of the year, that there's no major injury news. And then bam, we got the dagger right before we came on the air that Army quarterback Bryson Daly is out today. We've had 90 seconds to process this here before we came on air. We'll have to work through it as we go, but that's what I get. That's what I get for thinking, hey, there's nothing going on. It's pretty straightforward, and here we go with perhaps the top play on the slate having an injury that's going to keep him out. So tough blow to start the morning there, John.
Woo! I had Daly in two of my three cash game lineups, so I was looking away because I had to take him on my lineup. I've still got to process who I'm going to put in. So I'm working on that. But, man, we got our early morning news, and we haven't had this lately, Justin. If you don't know, the night slate originally had Oklahoma State versus, why can't I remember?
Arizona State.
Arizona State. That game has been moved to 3:30 in the afternoon, everyone, so you can no longer have Arizona State and Oklahoma State players in your night lineup. So I was working on that this morning also. I can't find out why they moved the game, but it is a 3:30 kickoff. So the game is not available on the main slate for DraftKings, and it's not now available on the evening slate. So if you have any Arizona State or Oklahoma State players, you got to work those lineups out. So that changes. We're still waiting on news, Justin. I've been looking for Trey Harris. I know he's questionable, but I'm not getting any updates. So I think that's the other big injury news, but nothing's come across yet, which that has an impact on Jackson Dart, the quarterback, and the pecking order of wide receivers for Mississippi. Have you seen anything yet?
Yeah, I haven't. That is a noon kick, so that's the only one that I had on my radar before the Army news broke. So I've got that kind of search up on my Twitter, still game time decisions as of the last updates from 20 to 30 minutes ago for Harris. So, and if you're wondering about the Army quarterback situation, so DraftKings has changed their pricing algorithm to where the backups are always priced the same as the starters these days. So Dwayne Coleman will start for Army. We haven't seen him a whole lot other than in blowouts. I mean, they're going to run the same system, so perhaps he can produce good numbers, but going to be tough for him to match the production of Daly, and it's not like Coleman is $5K on DraftKings. He's 8,900. So it just changes that conversation. If you were planning on using Daly today, you might have to rework some of those lineups a little bit. And we can get into that. I mean, here as the high-end quarterbacks, right, we had Daly as the top guy. You have Dart, you have Cam Ward, and Dylan Gabriel are kind of your other three in that top tier. Daly was at 33% ownership, which will obviously now go down to sub 3 or 4. Some people might miss the news, but so Ward and Dart and Gabriel are going to get a little bit more attention now. First thought here as we process the news, do we just pivot to one of these other high-end guys, or do we look to go cheaper? What are we doing if we're spending up at quarterback? Because I was all set to just use Daly here.
So I just said I had two lineups with Daly. So he was by far my highest owned quarterback. There is value we'll talk about later, Justin, at the quarterback position. But I'm not going to go for Cam Ward against Duke. Last week we saw, I couldn't believe it. Miami decided to run the ball effectively, and they've actually been closing fourth quarters out with Damian Martinez. Now he's a big back, 230 pounds, so he can pound the ball. So I'm a little worried about Ward here, and there's significant difference in salary. Trying to put up the lineup, it really changes your salary. So I'm probably not going to go to Ward right now. Dart. The only way I could pivot to Dart, and I am interested, but we talked about it. I need Trey Harris news confirmation. Dart has been not very well the last 3 weeks from a fantasy perspective. He was so hot the opening 4 weeks. He's not been great. So I'm a little bit worried about Dart. The pivot that's interesting, and I got to look at it more. Dylan Gabriel, I know it's against Michigan, but we have to change the narrative. Michigan isn't good. They're losing their best cornerback, Johnson, right? Isn't it Johnson? Why can't I remember his name now? But that cornerback's out. Dylan Gabriel now is less than Bryson Daly. So he does have some intriguing interest. And what do we got him? We have him very low ownership, right? Less than 5%. I think that's very interesting. So I'm going to look into the matchup a little bit more with Dylan Gabriel and the projections to see where I fall. But I do like Dylan Gabriel out of those three, I believe, the best.
Yeah, right now I'm leaning towards Dart. Again, the Harris news will probably impact my decision. If he's a go, I think it definitely becomes Dart for me. I'm with you on not really being on Ward. That's too expensive for me. It just, I like him okay, but 10-8 is tough to fit in your lineups today. So right now, and plus it was an easy enough switch to go from Daily to Dart, $100 difference. I've got Dart pinned in there, but that could change depending on the Harris news. And you could just skip this top tier entirely if you wanted to, and go down into the next range. Noah Fifita for Arizona, really not a value anymore. He hasn't really been that good. He's probably off my radar today. But then we get into that tough matchup for Will Howard as well. I think if I go anywhere for Ohio State today, it'll be with the receivers. But then that gets you into the Carson Beck, Seth Hennigan, Taylon Green range, which is probably the next logical stopping point for quarterback exposure today. I think a lot of people are going to be on Hennigan. That game has, I believe, the highest total on the slate at 61 with Memphis and UTSA. So if we're skipping the top tier or undecided on how to handle the top tier, who are we looking at in this middle range?
I highlighted Seth Hennigan on our site today because the game environment is so enticing, Justin. UTSA and Memphis, and we haven't had a lot of Memphis and UTSA. I don't think we've done UTSA all season. I could be wrong. I don't think they've been.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, and UTSA is a very interesting offense. They're not as good as they have been over the last 2 or 3 seasons, but they made a change at quarterback that we're going to talk about a little bit later because the value's there. But UTSA can put points on the board, and that is going to force Memphis also. And they have an electric offense at times. Now, Seth Hennigan has been a little disappointing because they have such a monster running back. So I do think there's a decision where you're going to go in the offense for Memphis. But if you want to differentiate, Seth Hennigan, man, with the projected, let's see, what do we have? The over-under is 61.5. The Tigers have an implied total of 34.5. I think this has shootout all over it. Hennigan could have, he has a floor of, I think, 20 DraftKings points. But if we got a little bit lucky and they put the ball in the air more around the goal line, Hennigan could have over 30 points. So I like Hennigan a lot.
Yeah, I like Hennigan a lot as well. I think this game is obviously super intriguing. You look at the way that this game should kind of be back and forth. 61-point total. Shouldn't get to, super blowout status. You wouldn't expect. I mean, the spread is a touchdown, I think. So, but with Memphis projected for 34 points, I think Hennigan, he projects really well in this middle tier. Certainly, if you wanted to go with Taylon Green, I think that's fine. That game, Arkansas projected for a lower total, but you do have a logical pairing with him, or if you're maybe looking to stack up that game. But again, we haven't really gotten to a must play yet at the quarterback position. And this gets to the nature of this slate could be, hey, maybe I want to go double cheap at quarterback. Rare has been the case where I think that is a super logical play, but this week I think it could make sense. And you could take maybe 2 quarterbacks sub 7K. You mentioned looking at the UTSA passing attack. Iowa State, their passing attack is pretty cheap. They're facing Texas Tech, who has basically the worst pass defense in the country.
They are.
If you're starting to look to value QBs, who do you like?
I love Rocco Beck. You mentioned it. The Red Raiders are dead last. I think they're giving up 308 yards per game in the air. What I love about Beck is we know where his targets are. We'll talk about them later, but it is a very small funnel of targets in which he throws to. Last week is something I had never seen out of Rocco Beck, Justin. We know he's a pocket passer, but he had 97 yards rushing. I have no idea where 97 yards rushing came on 20 carries.
Yeah, 20 carries.
I don't expect – that's crazy.
Maybe that's the new game plan.
That. Yeah, I mean, now if you look, he's had 8, 3, 4, 4. He basically averages about 4.5 carries a game. If we're getting 5 or 6 and we have a nice kind of, hopefully he turns that into 30, 40 yards rushing, who knows if he sneaks one into the goal line, but I'll take that. But I don't see how Iowa State does not put up 30 points against Texas Tech at home. And everyone, Iowa State is in the running for the Big 12 champion. They're undefeated. I think they're going to want to impress voters. They're going to want to put points on the board. They have some big games coming up. They might get to the conference championship game. Let's have Beck throw it a little bit. They rotate the running backs. We can talk about that later. I love Rocco Beck in this game. And then I've been, UTSA playing college fantasy football. They have let me get to is Owen McCowan is the quarterback. He did not open the season at quarterback for the Roadrunners. And I love that name. We've never been able to say that all year. I love the Roadrunners, their logo. What a great idea they had to be. But if you look at his last 3 games, Owen McCowan has 35, 24, and 27 DraftKings points. He's only 6.1K. On this slate, Justin, you were right. I do believe if you want to go into this game environment, it is okay to go lower for 2 quarterbacks here who I like. Now, I had Daly. I opened up the show with that, but now that Daly's out, I think it's real legitimate to go low end with 2 or 3 quarterbacks and really build your roster at other positions. And McCowan, I think, has a really nice floor against Memphis today.
Yeah, Becton and McCown, I think, are the guys that, will be pretty popular. Decent floors on both of them, I think. And you can get your cash game pairing, I think makes complete sense. In GPPs, I don't mind even getting a little wild with your cheap quarterbacks today. So I shall make the case for Zion Chris. This is very scary. Perhaps a little bit biased. The only the only Houston game I've watched this year is the game against TCU, which somehow they scored 30 points. Chris was 15 for 18 for 141 yards passing and a touchdown, and he ran for almost 100 yards and a touchdown in that game as well. They gave him the starting role last week against Utah. They somehow won that game. And nobody did much offensively. They only threw the ball 13 times. Chris did have 45 rushing yards. He did throw a couple of touchdowns. It was ugly, but he got there. And you look at the price, he's 4,700 on DraftKings. They are at Kansas State today, so they're 13-point underdogs. Whether they want to or not, they're going to have to try to throw the ball a little bit more. We know Chris can run. Maybe he breaks a big one with his legs. And how much do you really need? Well, he's $4,700 at a quarterback position that is relatively weak today. If you sort our quarterback projections by points per dollar, he's the number one guy. I'm not saying that, that's guaranteed by any means. And we've only got him at 6% ownership. Childs for Michigan State, maybe he's the other safer quote unquote option if you're looking to completely punt. But yeah, give me Chris in a GPP lineup or 2 today. I think you can do worse.
I like that call in GPP lineup because then you could really stack the running backs. right? There's some real interest in high-end running backs here. And when you're right, Justin, you're getting for 4,700. We always are seeking 3 times return. We would only need 14 and a half points. And he clearly has 20-point upside with his legs. Is it likely? No, but I'm trying to think, was he at University of Louisiana Monroe or University of Louisiana Lafayette? One of those 2 schools last year. He does have upside with his legs. And you mentioned it, on that one game, he looked great with his legs.
Yeah, it was Lafayette.
It was Lafayette. So I like that call as a total punt in your super flex.
All right. Don't go crazy. Don't go putting him into every lineup. It's not that much of an endorsement, but you could do worse. That's all I'm going to say. All right. With that, we could probably pivot to running backs. A couple reminders before we do that. If you want to ask questions while we're here on the air, the best way to do that is in the RotoGrinders Discord. Again, you do not have to be a paid subscriber to access this. Just go to rotogrinders.com. If you're a member, log in. If you're not a member, sign up for free. Get into the Discord, rotogrinders.com/Discord. And there's a live stream chat channel, which we will take your questions live on air. There's also a college football channel that, we'll keep you updated throughout the day on news, notes, updates, etc. But the live stream chat channel in the Discord, the best way to get the questions in on the air, and we will answer those here once we get through the positions. So check that out. All right, let's move to running backs. And as we kind of hinted at, part of the reason why it might make sense to go cheap at quarterback today is because it's a very running back heavy slate. If I sort our projections, we've got 6 running backs projected for above 20 fantasy points today. We've only got 4 wide receivers projected for above 20 fantasy points. So lots of running backs with high projections. You may want to spend up at the position today. And if you go cheaper at quarterback, it does make it easier to do that. So in terms of the high end guys, I mean, we've got a whole bunch of them that have put up big games so far this year at various points. RJ Harvey, Darius Taylor, Taj Brooks, Anderson for Memphis, with Memphis being on the slate today. He's the highest projected running back on the entire slate. So, and Giddens for Kansas State, the other one kind of on the high end here of the salary scale today. That's a lot of names. Who do you like the best out of that group of 5 or so?
I'm going to go into more detail, but I love Darius Taylor this week, Minnesota running back. He's at Illinois. If you've been watching the Illini this year, they're not very good against the run. And Darius Taylor is the guy in Minnesota. But what I like about him, Justin, is his pass catching upside. He has been, if you haven't been watching Minnesota, and we know college is a regional game, but here's some of his pass catching in the last 5 weeks. 5 receptions, 3 receptions, 5 receptions, and 10 receptions. Darius Taylor on a DraftKings, it almost seems like a bargain because of the pass catching. I think he's going to get the ball 25 times between running the ball and receiving the ball against the Illini defense. So I love him there. The other one I do like, and I don't usually talk about the top price guy, but RJ Harvey, man, they have some problems at quarterback. This team is a little bit falling apart, but I'll say one thing. They continue to pound RJ Harvey, the Knights. You get the touches. You have the volume here. They're at home against Arizona with a 31 implied total. I love RJ Harvey in this matchup.
Yeah, I really like Harvey this week as well. Again, they're a bit of a mess, but he's got over 300 yards rushing the last 2 weeks, and those were in tough matchups. I mean, you look at Iowa State and BYU, 2 of the better teams in the country this year. They're at home against Arizona this week. You mentioned, unsettled situation there at quarterback. Harvey should have a big day today for sure. So Harvey and Taylor, I think you certainly got to try to spend for one of them with the ability to go cheap at quarterback. Anderson for Memphis, particularly if you're not playing Hennigan. I mean, you got to get one of those 2 guys, I think, in your lineups. I mean, I would presume with your kind of 3 lineup approach, you've got at least one with Anderson and at least one with Hennigan. I mean, you got to get some exposure to that team today.
Oh, absolutely. I have Anderson in 2 of my lineups, and I did put a lineup with Hennigan because Mario Anderson's a decent receiver out of the backfield. Memphis opened the season with a multitude of running backs, and I was a little frustrated watching Memphis because Mario Anderson didn't get the number of touches we would hope from a fantasy standpoint. But what has happened is players have gotten injured or they've been ineffective, and the Memphis coaching staff, Justin, just literally woke up and decided, you know what, we should probably give Mario Anderson the ball a ton because that's what Memphis has done historically, has feed their star running back. So I have no problem putting Hennigan and Anderson. I have them in one of my 3 lineups together because he can catch the ball and he might score. I think he had a long receiving touchdown. If not last week, it was the week before. Anderson does catch the football. So look at this. In the last 5 games, another thing I like about Anderson, 3 receptions, 5 receptions, 4 receptions, 6 receptions, 5 receptions. I mean, you put him and Taylor together, what floor just of receiving production from those 2 players.
Yeah, certainly viable today. Anderson, you look at the rushing production, 54 carries the last 2 weeks. And even though his receiving yardage hasn't been that great, lots of dump off receptions, and that's huge in a PPR format. Plus they're projected for over 30 points today. So lots to like. Giddens as well. Look, I've got Giddens in some of my Zion Chris lineups, hoping that Kansas State gets out to a lead in that game. They can pound the run. The other guy that's slightly cheaper that still projects pretty well, and I think is going to carry some ownership because he's cheaper than the others, is Trevor Etienne. And look, I understand it. The touchdowns have been there. Florida's terrible, but Georgia plays Ole Miss next week. Could be an opportunity to maybe take it a little bit lighter on him as a solid home favorite. And it's not like he's going to run for 200 yards. Like Etienne does not have 90 rushing yards in a game this year. So I like him, but the ownership's going to be high because of the price. I don't think the ceiling is all that great. So it makes me a little bit nervous, but I'm a little underweight on Trevor Etienne today. Your thoughts on him and maybe some of the other guys in this 6K range?
I got a question about the top tier before we dive before we dive in. I've been basically just, learning more and more about college football as the year goes on, listening to you guys. And I've never seen a slate like this from a lineup building perspective yet. I've always found myself really deep dive in trying to find value to make lineups work. And it is incredibly easy on this slate because of the cheap quarterbacks, because of all the value we have everywhere. How much salary can we leave on the table in college football DFS? And should I be prioritizing a game stack over a run back over getting up to, say, Darius Taylor? I'm having trouble with a lineup that I'm looking at and going, I don't know if I want to leave $1,000 on the table, but it looks beautiful.
I think you can leave $1,000 on the table if you want to. And definitely iSeek and GPPs, you're looking for that undervalued game environment and you want the run back. Taylor's tough in a GPP because I don't know who you want to run it back with. I think you kind of play him a little bit naked, right? Because there's not a lot on the Illinois side.
I'm looking at a team that my quarterbacks are McCown and Becht.
I'm not against that.
and I'm looking at it and going, well, yes, Darius Taylor is available, but I could play Taj Brooks and Anderson as my 2 running backs. Leave a lot of money on the table, but they correlates really well with the teams.
I think Taj Brooks is I don't think he's the underrated option on the slate right now. We have him at less than 10% ownership. And he's that Texas Tech offense right now. They've had some problems. Morton, their quarterback, is supposed to play, but he got injured last week, and college reporting is very hard on injuries. So Taj Brooks is in line for a lot of touches, I think, in this game. I like that, and I'm not against $1,000 on the table in college football. It is different than NFL, TJ.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I think that that approach does make sense today. As far as Taj Brooks goes, I think the only concern is if they get absolutely blitzed.
Yes.
If Morton isn't healthy, and Iowa State, we know that Texas Tech's defense is horrible. So the only concern with Brooks, I mean, if they keep that game competitive, he's going to get his 100+ yards, touchdown or two. So yeah, if you're rolling a bit of a game stack there, I mean, you're just basically, if that game's not close, it's probably dead anyway. So you just got to hope Texas Tech keeps it somewhat competitive. If Morton is healthy, that will certainly help their odds. I think they're 14-ish point underdogs in that game. So just a matter of them being able to keep it close. All right, back to ETN and kind of this mid-range here. John, what do you like?
Well, I do like ETN a little bit, and I like what you said. I don't have ETN as a GPP option because I do believe that his ceiling is capped, especially if Georgia got ahead early. My only thought is ETN did play for Florida, and I do think that he's going to be fired up today. And I know coaches, I've been around enough football coaches. I think they're going to give him opportunities in the red zone to score a couple times. So I do like here, but I do agree with you. From a GGP perspective, I don't like ETN because I don't see him getting, 32, 33 points. But from a floor, I think he's got 100 yards and 1 or 2 touchdowns. That, to me, is a very reasonable day. So I like him in cash, but I don't necessarily like him in GPP.
Agree with that approach myself as well. So, all right, as we scroll down through the rest of the running back options, again, this is a position I am going to try to spend up for today, but there are options. If you think Army maybe leans on their backs a little bit more today, Udo is the guy that's getting the best projection. Henry for UTSA is grading out as a solid value at 4K. And the guy I talked about last week was Justice Ellison for Indiana. And he had 29 carries, so 123 yards and a touchdown. The price hasn't really come up. He's 5,200 on DraftKings. They're going to continue to pound the run. They're projected for 30 points today. I like Ellison again this week as one of my favorite values. But your thoughts on anybody else here at running back?
I do agree with you on Ellison. He's very interested on this slate. And I thought he looked really good last week in that game. I played him in a bunch of season-long leagues, and I played him in one cash game lineup. I thought he looked really good, so I agree with you there. But I think Kanye Uda, the running back at Army now, is really going to be interesting. Now, obviously, Bryson Daly was the key to the Army running game. But if you've not watched Army, Uda's been very good, Justin. 633 yards rushing, 7 touchdowns. But what I like a little bit about him is he should have goal line, opportunities now. We have a change at quarterback. The one thing about Bryson Daly, and I love this from a fantasy perspective, he was a greedy, wishbone, option quarterback. And we love that in college fantasy football. I don't know if the change at quarterback he's going to be as dominant in the goal line. Uda is a very interesting option. I think he now has 20 points in him. Isn't he 5,500? I think he's really fairly priced. Yep, 5,500. Now, there is one concern. I would not do him for GPP because he's only got 1 reception all year. And we know on DraftKings we want that pass catching upside. But if you're looking for a real nice cash game floor now, I think Uda is very fascinating today.
Our friend Golf Nut in the Discord chat asked a question about Quali Conley for Arizona. He's in that kind of mid-range price tag. Could be an interesting pivot off of ETN, but again, another guy that he's only got 1 100-yard game this year. I don't know. Arizona's been a bit of a wild card. They haven't produced offensively. I expected, even though McMillan is, one of the best wide receivers in the country, he did have a big game last week, but has been inconsistent. I don't know. I'm neutral, I guess, on Conley today, but any thoughts on him?
I like him as a GPP. I don't have him in a cash game lineup. I did early in the process, like Thursday night. I start looking at lineups, start looking at matchups, and I was interested in him. But as I look deeper and try to look at the salary, he's 6.4K. I just have pivoted away from him. But I do think he's an interesting kind of GPP play because he can catch the ball, but he's not uber. I mean, there's some nice 2, 3, 4, 7. But I think his ceiling, with McMillan on the team, Justin, it does kind of affect other players and their upside, right? Because if the upside's coming, it's probably from McMillan.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't have much Arizona today. I don't have a strong take on them one way or the other. So I am fine with that take. All right, let's go ahead and move to wide receiver here. And again, I am looking for news on Trey Harris. I still don't see any news on Trey Harris. He's still listed as a game time decision. So he's the most expensive wide receiver on the slate by a good margin. And then you've got McMillan, who we just kind of mentioned for Arizona. Again, perhaps one of the best receivers in the country. Had underwhelmed all year, did have 40 PPR points last week, big 200-yard game. And then you kind of go down into the 7K range. Tez Johnson for Oregon. You've got the Ohio State guys in that 7K range today. The big tight end, Warren, who's been a revelation for Penn State on the other side of that game, which is the highlight game of the day. Until Penn State wins a big game, I'm not going to get my hopes up about them doing it. They never do it. But
God, I'm sorry. This is worth James Franklin, dude. You got to win a big game somewhere, my friend. Like, it's bad, right? Like, really bad in big games.
Yeah, the Penn State fans I heard were calling for a boycott of the morning, TV show this morning because they wanted it to be a night game. And it's not. It's a noon kick. So your big game of the day is a noon kick between Ohio State and Penn State. But again, I mentioned I'm prioritizing spending at running back today. If you're spending at wide receiver, I do think McMillan is fine. I do think that Tez Johnson probably projects, he does, in terms of our ownership as the highest guy, but I don't feel a need to spend absolute top dollar today at wide receiver. Do you like any of these guys?
I do like McMillan, but I will say I only put him in one of my 3 cash game lineups because I wanted to differentiate. So instead of going 3 really strong running backs, I did add McMillan. But other than that, I'm not really targeting these high-end wide receivers on the slate. I believe there's so much value at the wide receiver position, especially in these projected high scoring games, that I'm going to the mid-level and lower level at the wide receiver position. But I do have McMillan in one of the 3 lineups because the ceiling is so high if you want to, find a bargain at the running back position. But I do like building around the high-end running backs.
Yeah, I like that call. That's kind of how I am handling it today myself. Restrepo, another guy that, again, I think Restrepo is good. He's certainly a guy you can plug into your lineups, but we both are largely off of Cam Ward today because of his salary tag. So naturally underweight on Restrepo as well. And then I am starting most of my lineups in the 6Ks. And let's just talk about, obviously the discussion is going to be how to handle the Iowa State passing game today. Texas Tech, we've talked about their pass defense throughout the show being, one of the worst in the country. And if you look at the Iowa State receivers, you've got Higgins at 6,700. You've got Noel at 5,900. They both project for about 20 points today. Good target share for both of them. Ownership pretty high on both of them. Higgins, Noel, you got a preference. You playing both. What are you doing with the Iowa State pass catchers today?
When I have 2 really good receivers who are so tight in production, I tend to gravitate towards the lower salaried. So I have Jalen Noel on 2 of my 3 cash game lineups. Now I always, Higgins is great, right? So I have him in the other one. I like the Beck stack, with one of the receivers. I do think you could go both. I just preferred to have Beck with Noel in 2, and Beck with Higgins in 1. So I like Noel a little bit more because it is significant, right? Isn't it like 6.8 to 5.9? That's a
67. Yeah, it's $800.
Yeah, that helps you when you're looking at lower end wide receivers for some value. So I have Noel in 2 and Higgins in 1. They're so good though, by the way.
Yeah, and that's the same kind of a weighted approach I have taken as well. A little bit more exposure to Noel. That $800 does help. Maybe get you a better, top end guy somewhere. Pivot up to a running back that you like. But the roster construction still in a little bit of flux. I might change my exposure just a little bit now that I'm going to end up with less Bryson Daly, but haven't had a chance to fix my own lineups until we get off the air here. All right, other guys in kind of this mid range. I just want to talk about Iowa State by themselves, but we've hinted at Rock Taylor throughout the show. Daniel Jackson is another guy I like quite a bit today. Armstrong for Arkansas, particularly if you're on Taylor Green. Taylor's probably the one that I have the most exposure to because I like Hennigan. Sounds like you might be in that same boat, but how are you handling these other mid-range guys?
I do like Rock Taylor, and I think if you're going to go with a Hennigan build, you probably should have one of their wide receivers. I like Rock Taylor the best, even though he has not had as good of a season as I had hoped. The ceiling is there. But the one player that I like, if you don't want Darius Taylor, and I'm not suggesting you put a lot of Minnesota Golden Gophers in your lineup, but wide receiver Daniel Jackson, I'm looking at him, and his numbers are so much better than I expected. He's averaging 16.4 DraftKings points. And in the last 2 games, my friend.
Yeah, he's just been on the upswing.
On the upside, 9 for 117 with 2 touchdowns, 10 for 89. I do like this matchup against Illinois, but I would not play Jackson and Taylor together. But I have Jackson in one of my lineups in which I don't have Taylor because I do think he's going to be peppered with targets against the Illini here.
Yeah, and the touches are so concentrated in that offense that it makes it easy to take those guys. Whereas, Illinois on the other side, we know that they're going to spread it around a little bit more. All right, open the floor up. We talk about value pass catchers here. I don't think you absolutely need to go to the bottom of the barrel, but you certainly can. You like UTSA? Any interest in a pass catcher there? Who else? Anybody else on your radar?
I like Chris Carpenter, the wide receiver for UTSA. He's 3.7K. We have him at over 3 times return. He's only 3.7. That's just, to me, a very nice price in a very good environment. So I am into putting him on the squad this week. If you are looking for maybe an option in Texas Tech, if you're looking for the passing game, and Justin mentioned it, maybe Iowa State gets out to a big league. Caleb Douglas, we haven't mentioned him. Now he's 4.8. He's not bottom level. But Caleb Douglas deserves some attention at 4.8, especially if the Red Raiders fall behind and they have to play catch up. Douglas has been very good the last couple of weeks. I like him at wide receiver. And I'm trying to think if there's anyone else real low level. Oh, I guess you could go with the Michigan State pass catchers, right? They're very dirt cheap. I think you're looking for a catch-up environment against Indiana. But you have Nick Marsh, the freshman who's at 4K. But then you have Foster. And let me see. Foster is so cheap.
He's 3,500.
He's 3.5. I'm just looking for second half peppered targets. And Foster in the last 2 games has 4 for 44 and 5 for 100 with the touchdown. Lots of risk. But Foster, if you're looking for bottom barrel, I think that's good because I think the Spartans are going to have to throw the ball late in the game.
Yeah, I've put Foster in some of my lineups where I'm using Ellison for Indiana.
Yeah.
Some of my GPP lineups where hopefully Indiana can get out to a lead. And then you've got the cheap Ellison at running back, cheapish, and then Foster as a cheap pass catcher, and then you can pretty easily fit 2 high-end running backs around them in that build. All right, time for us here to recap DraftKings. Before we do that, just a reminder, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up button. Appreciate that very much. Support the channel, support RotoGrinders. We greatly appreciate that. If you're waking up early on a Saturday morning to take in the college football content with us. And then also, as a reminder, if you're interested in learning more over at RotoGrinders, we have introduced Combo Lite, our newest product, which gives you the power of simulation for a fraction of the price of other tools. Competitors charge hundreds a month for their sim products, but Combo Lite is just $39.99, and it includes our SimLabs lineup building tool, plus content from some of your favorite DFS analysts. Combo Lite does not limit you to one sport. It is available with SimLabs access to the 4 most popular sports, including MLB, NFL, NBA, and golf. You won't find a more cost-effective option anywhere. And of course, with NBA season rolling now and NFL season in full gear, good bang for your buck at this time of the season. All right, we like to recap the DraftKings conversation with John's Fantastic Four options. And John, go ahead, take it away.
We've talked about a lot of them today, but go to our optimizer on RotoGrinders and put in these 4 for your my Fantastic Four and see what our optimizer gives you. At quarterback, I do think Rocco Beck, especially with Bryson Daly out, is a significant salary saver, and he does have a nice ceiling. So I'm going with Rocco Beck at quarterback. I love the backfield. And Mario Anderson, look, that's a great deal. So I always like to talk about other options for people. I love Darius Taylor, so he's in my Fantastic Four. And I do have Trevor Etienne in my Fantastic Four for cash games. So my running backs are Darius Taylor and Trevor Etienne, and that allows you some flexibility if you want to go with another high-end running back. And then at wide receiver, I have Jalen Noel of Iowa State. So in the Fantastic Four, plug in Rocco Beck at quarterback, Darius Taylor at running back, Trevor Etienne at running back, and Jalen Noel, and you can get up to 20 lineups, cash game GPP. I love those 4 as a foundation for your lineups this week.
All right, like it, and check that out. So let's go ahead and we'll spend a couple minutes here talking FanDuel before we get off the air. Let's see. We've got some of the night games on the FanDuel slate, or that change time game, that Arizona State, Oklahoma State game that we talked about at the top is on the FanDuel slate tonight. Louisville, Clemson is another one. USC, Washington, Pittsburgh, SMU, kind of a good under the radar game tonight. 2 teams that have been impressive in the first half of the season. We'll just talk about some of these additional options over on FanDuel if you're playing the slate over there. Quarterback options. I mean, having those night games gives us access to Cade Klubnik, Eli Holstein, Sam Levitt with Arizona State being on the slate. Kevin Jennings has been a popular dual threat guy. Anybody you want to add to the quarterback mix on FanDuel?
I do absolutely love Klubnik. I think he's a legitimate option here. He is very pricey, so you're going to have to make a decision on that. But my favorite player to save money on this is Miller Moss of USC. Miller Moss has quietly been pretty good, Justin. I mean, I
know. I played him like every week, and it seems like it's finally started to pay off a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a good environment at Washington. They should be playing from behind. He can throw the football. I think, look, we have a very low ownership on Miller Moss, so I like him. Now, his ceiling might be capped because he doesn't run it with his legs like some of the other quarterbacks. And I didn't mention, I wanted to mention him a little bit, and it's worth it on this slate too. Taylon Green of Arkansas. In DraftKings, he's interesting. He's actually a lot less expensive. But you've got to bank on Arkansas playing catch-up in the second half. If they have to play hero ball with Taylon Green against Mississippi, Taylon Green, what did he score, over 50 points last week? I mean, he went nuts. Now, it was obviously a great matchup for Taylon Green in Arkansas, 48.6 against Mississippi State. Obviously, Mississippi is much better, a more difficult matchup. But Taylor Green, with his dual threat ability, he's very interested on this slate.
Yeah, I like him as well, and easy to fit into lineups, even at that salary. Just with the way that FanDuel does their pricing, he's fittable in there. It's not like he's 12K. I can't. There he is. He's 9,400 on FanDuel. So
that's not bad.
Yeah, it's not. It seems high, but just because of where the seat, like Cam Ward is 12-2 and Klubnik is 11-8 on FanDuel. So comparatively speaking, it's not bad. So I like that call a good bit as well. Running backs, again, most of the guys that we talked about on DraftKings, lots of high-end running backs on DraftKings today. So there's not going to be a whole lot of change on FanDuel, with the exception of if you want to play Cam Scatabo as the most expensive guy on the slate. He's slightly more expensive than Harvey. Any interest in additional running backs on FanDuel? Jonah Coleman is a guy I think you can highlight on FanDuel. He's on both slates, but the price tag on FanDuel, $7,300, is really cheap over there. So I do like Jonah Coleman.
I agree with you on Jonah Coleman. That's an underrated, especially you're going to probably run the ball at home against USC. So I like Coleman a lot. But, man, I was all in on Scatabo, and we opened up the show with talking about they moved the kickoff on that Arizona State-Oklahoma State game. He is the highest price, so I understand if you don't want to pay up. But Scatabo has such a high ceiling, Justin. He might be the most underrated running back in the nation right now, because probably most people aren't watching Arizona State on a regular basis. But from a fantasy perspective, I love Scatabo. And Dylan Sampson, man, how good has he been for Tennessee? So if you want to take one of those two high-end running backs and matching up with Coleman for kind of differentiation on this FanDuel slate, I like that option a lot, Justin. Pick one of these with Coleman, and you could have a really high ceiling. Now, one player that I don't like as much on the FanDuel, if you haven't seen it, Desmond Reed, what makes him so interesting? We played a lot of them. Remember early in the season, Justin, in September?
Yep.
It's his pass catching. And FanDuel only gives you half point. So that's a big difference. I don't look at Desmond Reed as really a grinder on the ground. Now, he's explosive, so he could add a 40, 50-yard run. But he's really dynamic in the pass catching game. So I don't necessarily like him as much on FanDuel.
And that game, I mean, look, there's not a ton of great games today outside of obviously that Ohio State game at noon against Penn State. But if you're looking for a game to watch tonight, like SMU and Pitt is probably the game of the evening in terms of actual implications. SMU is 7-1. Their only loss was a 3-point loss to BYU, which obviously doesn't look like a bad loss. And Pitt is undefeated. So if these teams, they're ranked 18 and 20 right now, and remember, 12 teams get in the playoffs. So if they want playoff hopes, the winner of this game is probably going to move up into that like 14-ish range in the rankings. So Pitt and SMU. Good game to watch tonight if you're looking for some evening entertainment, anyhow, or at least us college football junkies can get excited about it.
I can't wait for that game because I'll find this. Pitt just dominated Syracuse with that defense, so I want to see, because SMU Rash Lachey is a very good coach, offensive mind. I want to see how the Mustangs deal with this Pittsburgh defense.
Yeah, I'll be honest, a couple weeks ago or last week or whenever that game was, it was a midweek game. I bet Syracuse against Pitt, and I said that I thought Kyle McCord would be a difference maker, and he was a difference maker. He threw 5 picks. So I was correct that he was a difference maker, and just the wrong way. So that was not a good read. That was an easy L. So I'll own that one. But the Pitt defense a lot better than I gave them credit for, and we'll see what they do tonight. All right, wrapping up the FanDuel slate here. Let's take a peek at the wide receivers. Looking at our projected ownership, Dominic Lovett for Georgia's pretty cheap over there, so he'll get some ownership. Not a whole lot for high-end wide receivers that are just in the night games or the later games. I suppose Brennan Presley, but I don't think I can trust that Oklahoma State offense right now. Anybody else you want to add to the mix? FanDuel wide receivers.
Well, one thing that I noticed, there's a big difference in pricing on Jaden Higgins on the FanDuel. So I'm totally in on Noel on the FanDuel because it's really hard to get Higgins at 9.5K in there. But I do like Armstrong, Andrew Armstrong, the wide receiver of Arkansas. He's a sneaky play with Taylon Green if you do believe that Mississippi is going to jump out here. And two wide receivers who I like, and I'm just going to – Denzel Boston of the Washington Huskies is very fascinating against that USC secondary that's banged up. And Denzel Boston's a home run hitter having a very good season. And Jordan Tyson of Arizona State, I don't think we've mentioned him. I don't think he's been on a slate, Justin, that we've looked at in detail. Jordan Tyson is sneaky good this year for the Sun Devils, everyone. He's been getting peppered with more and more targets late in the season. So I do like Boston and Tyson if you want to look to differentiate.
Yeah, and somebody had asked, what's my pick of the day? I've been hot. Thank you, except for that Pitt Syracuse pick last week. Last week wasn't great. The previous few weeks I've been doing really well. So we'll see. But speaking of that, I do like Arizona State today. They are 4-point favorites. Oklahoma State, look for all the talent they have. They haven't been able to settle in on a quarterback. Ollie Gordon's production has suffered a bit. I think, frankly, at 3-5, they've largely packed it in. This season really isn't going anywhere for Oklahoma State. So I do like the Sun Devils minus the 4 points in that game. So that's my pick of the day. Somebody had asked on the YouTube a couple of questions. One more in the Discord from Golf Nut. Aside from Memphis UTSA, what is the best game stack environment? I don't love the game stacks today as much as I usually do. It's been tough. I think Texas Tech and Iowa State is probably the most logical one, with the hope that Texas Tech can keep that close. Any thoughts on that from you?
I think a sneaky one is Mississippi, Arkansas. I've kind of hinted at it a little bit, but I have a feeling that one may shoot out. And then it's really, the problem is if you want to go with the Texas Tech passing game, but we don't know how healthy Morton is. If I knew Morton was 100% healthy, I might be in on that Iowa State Texas Tech game. Now, if you really want to go contrarian, Penn State, Ohio State, no one's talking about that game. If you want to go the Penn State running game, and then you want to counter with the Ohio State receivers and Will Howard, that is a very sneaky because no one's talking about that. It's going under the radar, everyone.
All right. Taking a peek for additional questions. It looks like NBA DFS is going to try to find a cheap wide receiver. So he's asking Willie McCoy, the wide receiver for UTSA, or Zachary Franklin, the wide receiver for Illinois, who did have 6 catches last week. Preference on those, I presume you take the UTSA guy, if I have read your analysis correctly.
You are 100% correct. I just think there's more opportunity at the end of the game. And even though I like Carpenter, I think McCoy, I would not be surprised if McCoy led the team in targets, but I think it's like a 30% chance. I do think that Carpenter leads the team, but I like Carpenter, but McCoy I take over Franklin.
All right, last question before we get out of here. Dimitri in the YouTube chat had asked any love for Evan Stewart against Michigan with their secondary situation. Evan Stewart, just 1 catch last week, but they kind of blew out Illinois. He does have a couple. He's very up and down. I'd say if you're looking at Evan Stewart, it would be GPP only.
Completely concur with you. And I played Evan Stewart last week in a cash game lineup. He's too up and down. He's frustrated me all year, Justin. So he's strictly GPP environment for me.
All right. With that, we are going to call it a show this morning. As always, thank you for tuning in. If you hit the like button before you exit, we'd appreciate that very much. Thanks to TJ for getting up early and producing for us on a Saturday morning. And as always, thanks to John for joining me. Enjoy the first weekend of November, everybody. We'll be back with you next week, same time, same place. Until then, for TJ and John, I'm Justin. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we will catch you later.